Welcome back to Arkansas, where we try to make sense of the issues affecting Arkansans. Today, we're going to talk about your 2024 ballot, specifically Issue 3, the Arkansas Medical Marijuana Amendment of 2024. Issue 3 is an amendment to the state constitution, so if it passes, it would exist as the highest legal standard in the state above all other state laws, and it could only be changed in the future with another amendment, either from a citizen's petition or referred by the legislature. Issue 3 is full of details, and to talk about it, we need to get pretty in the weeds, so to speak, so there are links in the description below to skip to each section, in case you need to watch a bit now and come back later. Let's start by talking about the history you need to know for the changes in Issue 3 to make sense. We're going to start pretty far afield, but stick with me. It all comes back. In the early 1900s, Arkansas added to its constitution the right to initiatives and referenda, or I&R, which allows citizens to change state laws by writing a petition, gathering signatures, and sending it to a statewide vote. Initiatives can be used to create initiated acts, which change normal state laws, or initiated amendments, which change the state constitution. That's what Issue 3 is. I&R was meant to allow voters to bypass the legislature, but it included a problem. The rules say if the legislature wants to change the Constitution, they have to ask voters for approval. However, it also says that with a 2/3 vote, they can change amendments created by citizens' initiatives. But those are part of the Constitution too. So that created a loophole where the legislature could change the Constitution without asking voters. So in 1951, the Arkansas Supreme Court ruled that that wording had been a mistake, and the legislature could only change initiated acts, not initiated constitutional amendments. Thanks to that 1951 decision, the legislature today is not supposed to be able to change citizen-initiated amendments, including the one that created the medical marijuana program. That will become a big deal. But how did Arkansas pass a medical marijuana amendment when marijuana is illegal federally? Well, that story starts in 1971 with the passage of the Controlled Substances Act. That act created classifications called schedules to indicate how dangerous a drug is and whether it has any medical value. Marijuana was labeled Schedule 1, indicating it had a high potential for abuse and little or no medical value. That also meant it was federally outlawed. The Nixon administration knew marijuana had been misclassified. Nixon's own marijuana commission recommended it be moved to a lower schedule and treated more like alcohol, but Nixon refused. The problem is the findings from that commission were public, and the conflict within the federal government opened the door for states to push back. Because while the federal government can enforce federal marijuana laws, it's up for state and local officials whether they enforce state and local laws, or whether those laws exist at all. Some states began decriminalizing marijuana, so breaking those rules would only result in a citation or fines rather than jail time. Other states initiated medical marijuana programs, allowing patients with a prescription to buy, use, or grow small amounts. And then in 2012, Colorado and Washington became the first states to legalize marijuana entirely. Meanwhile, since the Obama administration, the federal government has gradually relaxed its enforcement of marijuana laws. And in 2024, after a multi-year review, the Drug Enforcement Administration announced a proposal to reschedule marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, putting it on the same level as testosterone or Tylenol with codeine. The final set of hearings are set to happen in December, with an official announcement expected early 2025. Here in Arkansas, marijuana was illegal beginning in 1923, but as early as the 1980s, groups began petition campaigns to either decriminalize it or create a medical marijuana program. Medical marijuana first made the Arkansas ballot in 2012, but was barely defeated. Finally, in 2016, 2 marijuana initiatives made it to the ballot. One was struck down in court, but the other passed and is now part of the Arkansas Constitution as Amendment 98. A lot of Issue 3 deals with changing Amendment 98. So let's talk about how it works right now. Amendment 98 makes possession and use of marijuana for medical purposes legal in Arkansas if you have a medical marijuana card. You can only get that card after an assessment by a physician to confirm you have one of a specific list of qualifying conditions. If that physician signs your paperwork, you can submit it to the state with your application. Once you have your card, you can buy a limited quantity of marijuana every 2 weeks in multiple forms from any Arkansas dispensary, who in turn get their products from the cultivation facilities. Amendment 98 includes a lot of details, but leaves plenty more up to specific state departments. departments. Each of those departments also gets to set their own policies as long as they do not conflict with Amendment 98. But Amendment 98 also includes a bit at the end, Section 23, which allows the legislature to change the amendment as long as those changes are made in the same manner as required for amendment of laws initiated by the people. That's a reference to the INR rules we talked about at the beginning, the part where the text says the legislature can change amendments by themselves, but the court said they have to go to voters. So, is Section 23 talking about the text as written or as interpreted by the court? The legislature chose to go with the interpretation that did not require them to involve voters, and spent 2017 crafting a mountain of changes to the medical marijuana program, many of them making it more restrictive. Meanwhile, the actual rollout of the program was plagued by poor planning and management. The first medical marijuana cards went out in February of 2019. But there were no dispensaries open at the time. The first one opened that May, and others followed gradually. But despite that slow start, the program has exploded since then. As of September 2024, over 106,000 Arkansans have a medical marijuana card. That's about 4.6% of all adults in the state. And the program has brought Arkansas over $1.1 billion in tax revenue. But there are still a lot of disagreements about the state's administration of the program. The most consequential is a lawsuit seeking to throw out all of the changes the legislature has made to Amendment 98, since they ignored that 1951 court decision requiring they go to voters. In 2023, a Pulaski County judge ruled partially in their favor, voiding out 27 changes the legislature had made. That took effect immediately, but the state has filed an appeal with the Arkansas Supreme Court. And that brings us to Issue 3, which would make a lot of changes to Amendment 98. Some of them expand or change the existing laws, while others essentially hit the reset button, taking the language back to where it was before the legislature's changes. Even if the Arkansas Supreme Court reverses the lower court ruling, if Issue 3 passes, its changes would be the most recent version approved by voters, so they would remain law. Issue 3 has 8 sections, but only sections 3 through 6 change anything. Section 3 is rewrites of the existing medical marijuana rules. Sections 4 and 5 are 2 brand new sets of medical marijuana rules, and Section 6 changes a whole other part of the state constitution. Let's start by talking about those rewrites, and we'll group them by who they affect most: doctors, patients, and businesses. Under the current rules, the person who signs the paperwork you need to get a medical marijuana card has to be a physician, which it defines as a doctor of medicine or doctor of osteopathic medicine, licensed to practice in Arkansas and allowed to prescribe federally controlled substances. But Issue 3 would change the term from physician to healthcare practitioner, or HCP, which includes those 2 original kinds of doctors, as well as nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, and pharmacists, so long as they're licensed in Arkansas. It also removes the requirement for federally controlled substance licensing, since most of those newly added HCPs won't have that. With that new definition in place, Issue 3 would do a bunch of find and replace to the old amendment, taking all the references to physicians and replacing them with HCPs. That also includes the ethics rules, so even though Issue 3 would expand who can give you a certification, it still maintains the same standards for their conduct. Issue 3 would also change what those HCPs have to do before certifying a patient. Under the current rules, a physician has to complete an assessment of the patient's medical history and current condition made in the course of a physician-patient relationship. Under the current Department of Health rules, you can establish a physician-patient relationship over telehealth, but you cannot get your assessment for medical marijuana certification that way. Issue 3 would eliminate the requirement for an existing physician-patient relationship, only requiring an assessment from an HCP, and it would explicitly allow that assessment to happen over telemedicine. Issue 3 would also change what that assessment is looking for. Right now, the physician's assessment is to check and see if you have one of a specific list of qualifying conditions set forward under the amendment. Those are the only conditions that will qualify you for a medical marijuana card. Issue 3 would expand those qualifying conditions to include any other condition not otherwise specified that a healthcare practitioner considers debilitating to the patient and which may be alleviated by the use of usable marijuana. Now we'll talk about patients. In addition to the regular medical marijuana card, Amendment 98 created a special kind of card which allows for purchase and possession by designated caregivers, people helping out patients who are either physically disabled or under 18. The Department of Health created a list of things which will disqualify you from serving as a caregiver if they come up on a background check. The DOH's policy is to allow parents serving as caregivers for their children to bypass that check, but Issue 3 would make that exemption official and also exempt legal guardians. The Department of Health has also set up rules for medical marijuana patients from other states who want to buy from dispensaries in Arkansas. The patient has to have a valid medical marijuana card from their own state, but it must have been issued for one of the qualifying conditions from the Arkansas amendment. If they have that, they can get a temporary 90-day license, but they have to go through an application process and pay the same $50 fee an Arkansan pays for a full year. Under Issue 3, anyone with a valid medical marijuana license issued anywhere in the U.S. would be treated as if they had an Arkansas license. No check for medical conditions, no extra application, no fee. What's more, people from other states could get an Arkansas license, as long as they go through the same process Arkansans have to. On top of that, Issue 3 would eliminate the $50 fee patients now pay at application and renewal, and it would extend the default length of licenses from 1 year to 3. And everyone who has a currently valid license would get an extra 2 years added on. The third set of changes is about businesses that grow and sell marijuana. If you have a medical marijuana card, you're allowed to go to an Arkansas dispensary and buy a limited amount of products which contain usable marijuana. Right now, usable marijuana is defined as all the parts of the marijuana plant, as well as oils, waxes, derivatives, and any mixture or preparation made from the plant. Issue 3 would add even more ways of preparing marijuana to that list, and would change the language to make that list inclusive rather than exclusive. So usable marijuana would mean everything on the list, but possibly other things too. One thing is specifically excluded though: hemp plants with no more than 0.3% THC concentration. That language is taken directly from the federal government's 2018 Farm Bill and ensures that federally legal hemp isn't accidentally lumped in with the laws about usable marijuana. Amendment 98 requires the Medical Marijuana Commission to license 2 types of businesses: cultivation facilities and dispensaries. But since then, they've added 3 more types of licenses: transporters, distributors, and processors. Processors act as a go-between, buying usable marijuana from cultivators and turning it into a product which they then sell to dispensaries. But under the original amendment, dispensaries and cultivators can only transport marijuana to and from specific types of businesses, and processors was not one of them. So Issue 3 would add processors to that list. Also, right now dispensaries are not allowed to buy or sell equipment for burning and inhaling marijuana, specifically pipes, water pipes, bongs, chillums, rolling papers, and roach clips. That rule was one of the additions from the legislature, and Issue 3 would eliminate that restriction. Another change involves how medical marijuana can be advertised. Right now, the Alcoholic Beverage Control Division sets the rules for licensed marijuana businesses. Their current rules say that cultivation facilities are not allowed to advertise publicly at all. Dispensaries can, but they're restricted on the content of their advertisements and must be able to prove that no more than 30% of the people who experience the ad are under the age of 18. Issue 3 would require all advertising restrictions to be narrowly tailored to avoid marketing to kids. Narrowly tailored is a legal term that means the rules have to achieve their goal in the least restrictive way possible. Also, in that same section, Issue 3 would still require usable marijuana to be sold in child-proof packaging. While it does get rid of a specific reference to federal packaging guidelines, that does not prevent the ABCD from adopting those guidelines. In fact, it means the ABCD can update their packaging rules in the future without having to do it through a constitutional amendment. So now let's talk about Sections 4 and 5 of Issue 3, the new marijuana rules. Section 4 would make it legal for patients and caregivers, 21 and older, with a valid medical marijuana card, to own, grow, and use up to 14 marijuana plants. Half of them must be under 14 inches tall, while the rest have no height restriction. Also, there can only be 14 total plants at any one residence, even if multiple medical marijuana patients live there. The plants can only be for personal use, and you cannot sell or trade them. And the ABCD would be responsible for regulating home grow. Issue 3 would also eliminate the section of Amendment 98 which used to outlaw home grow, and change the dispensary rules so they can sell seeds and plants to patients. Next, Section 5 of Issue 3 is a trigger law, which takes effect if the federal government either removes marijuana from the list of controlled substances entirely or gets rid of federal laws against possession. If that happens, and Issue 3 has passed, all adults in Arkansas would be allowed to possess up to 1 ounce of usable marijuana. No license necessary. The existing cultivation facilities and dispensaries would be allowed to start selling to the public, too. In fact, they would be the only ones allowed to do so. The last few bits of Issue 3 come in direct response to the legislature making changes to Amendment 98 without going to voters. Issue 3 would entirely repeal the parts of Amendment 98 which, according to them, allowed the legislature to make those changes. Issue 3 would also change what Arkansans can do if they feel like the state is obstructing the medical marijuana program. Arkansas officials have faced multiple lawsuits claiming their actions violate the amendment. But in turn, the state has claimed
sovereign immunity,
a special kind of protection for state officials against lawsuits. Issue 3 would prevent the state from using the
sovereign immunity
defense against a lawsuit, just trying to get them to do their jobs as described by the medical marijuana amendment. And the very last thing Issue 3 would do is to change a completely different part of the Arkansas Constitution. The initiative and referenda rules we talked about before on how the legislature can change initiated amendments. Issue 3 would reword that section, making the language much more clear. Quote, "Unless expressly allowed in such constitutional amendment, no constitutional amendment shall be amended or repealed unless approved by a vote of the people under this Constitution." Unquote. That would make the 1951 Supreme Court decision an official part of the state constitution and not subject to overturn in the future. It would also prevent any more changes to the medical marijuana amendment, unless they go through the voters. So that's everything Issue 3 would do. We can now talk about arguments for and against Issue 3. As always, we will try to present the strongest possible arguments both for and against. But first, let's get out of the way one very bad argument, which is being made very loudly. Earlier this year, mailers went out claiming Issue 3 would cause Chinese companies to come to Arkansas and operate marijuana farms. These claims are mixing up 2 stories. First, the Arkansas legislature passed a law banning companies owned by foreign governments from owning farmland in Arkansas. Both flyers reference a specific story of a Chinese company forced to sell off its Arkansas farm. They fail to mention that the farm was relatively small, about a quarter square mile, and that so far it is the only instance of a violation of that law. Also, the land was not being used for marijuana farming, and the company was given 2 years to divest, so they actually still own the land. The flyer also mentions Chinese crime syndicates getting rich off marijuana sales in America. And that part actually has some truth to it. There has been a large problem in Oklahoma with China-linked organized crime groups growing huge amounts of marijuana and selling it in other states where it's not legal, or in states where it is, but they can undercut the market price. However, those groups operate in Oklahoma for a specific reason. When Oklahoma legalized medical marijuana, it put no limit on the total number of grower licenses and prevented any limits on how much marijuana they can grow. Even states with recreational marijuana like California limit the number of growers or the size of their farms. Thanks to that complete lack of restrictions, currently in Oklahoma there are 4,617 cultivation facilities. Arkansas caps our total at 8, and Issue 3 would not increase that or how much product they can grow. So even if Issue 3 passed, Arkansas's laws would not allow for anywhere near the large-scale growing operations seen in Oklahoma, so cartels would have no reason to move here. These flyers are fear-mongering, and there are much better arguments to be made against Issue 3. So let's make them. The most common argument against Issue 3 is that while it claims to be an extension of the existing medical marijuana laws, in reality, it's just recreational with extra steps. Loosening limitations on who can certify a patient, opening up the list of conditions to include anything based on a subjective opinion, dropping the requirement for a patient-physician relationship, eliminating the licensing fee. Altogether, these changes would make it incredibly easy to get medical marijuana. It's already not hard to find Arkansas doctors online who advertise themselves as prescribing medical marijuana. Some even tout their high rate of patient approval. That's the kind of thing that might encourage drug-seeking behavior from patients who don't actually qualify. If Issue 3 passes, Any Arkansan could use telemedicine to remotely call into one of these doctors to get easy approval. And then, because there's no longer a licensing fee, their only cost would be that doctor's visit. That means easy access to a card, and in turn access to the maximum amount of usable marijuana every 2 weeks. This combines with an existing critique of Arkansas laws. Patients are limited by weight rather than concentration. When you're buying from a dispensary, an ounce of a not particularly potent marijuana strain and an extremely potent one count the same towards your 2-week limit. The same goes for usable marijuana in the form of concentrated oil or vape juice, and a doctor's certification for a card does not come with a dosage or any limits, so anyone can buy the maximum weight at the highest concentration every 2 weeks. Compare that to medicines marijuana is replacing, like pain pills, which come in precise dosages with strict refill limits. Some folks believe that marijuana should be available for use as a medicine, but also that the Arkansas laws don't actually treat it as carefully as medicine should be treated. Others argue that the existing barriers to getting a medical marijuana card serve as a good filter, keeping people out who want to use recreationally but can't clear the existing hurdles. Whether it's a belief that the program is already too accessible or that it's just the right amount of accessible as is, both groups argue Issue 3 would make access to medical marijuana way too easy. But there's also an argument against Issue 3 from people who want marijuana laws to be looser. Right now, Amendment 98 only allows 8 licenses for cultivation facilities and 40 for dispensaries. Under Issue 3, if marijuana is made federally legal, then it becomes legal in Arkansas too. But also, the cultivation and sale of marijuana in this state shall only be allowed as provided under this amendment. That would seem to mean Arkansas recreational marijuana would still be limited to 8 cultivators and 40 dispensaries. And under Amendment 98, those cultivators are only allowed to grow and possess enough marijuana to serve medical marijuana patients. And that amount is set by the Medical Marijuana Commission and the Department of Health, not exactly known for their liberal views on how much marijuana should be available to Arkansans. If cultivators can't increase how much they grow, despite a huge increase in people who can buy, it would create a shortage of marijuana available. Medical patients would be competing with recreational users for a limited supply, potentially leaving some folks without medicine and driving up prices. That might be offset by medical home grow, but those plants have to be bought from dispensaries, who can only have a limited number at any given time. Again, it's an area where a sudden spike in demand could mess with the price and availability, leaving actual patients without their medicine. Those rules would also give the existing marijuana businesses a huge advantage. No new licenses means no new competition, despite a much larger market. Any new businesses that wanted to get into the industry would have to wait for one of the existing licenses to be rescinded. Areas without a dispensary now wouldn't get one unless one of the existing ones moved. And none of this could be changed without another marijuana amendment. And it's getting harder and harder for those to make the ballot. If some of these critiques sound familiar, it's because they were also leveled against the recreational marijuana amendment that failed in 2022. In fact, by not creating any new licenses, legalization under Issue 3 would be, in some ways, even more restrictive than that last attempt. While rescheduling marijuana is a certainty, it's not clear if or when the federal government will take the larger step of legalization. But one of the 2 presidential candidates says she would push for it, so it might be on the horizon. Some folks say that the changes Issue 3 would make right now are not worth the restrictions it would lock in for when federal legalization rolls around. So, if you already oppose the existing medical marijuana program and don't want to see it expand, or if you support the program as is but think Issue 3 would make marijuana access too easy, or if you think Issue 3's rules in case of legalization are too restrictive and outweigh its potential benefits, then you'll want to vote no on Issue 3. Now let's tackle arguments for Issue 3. And the most common one is this. Arkansas has had medical marijuana for 5 years now, counting from when sales actually started, and it's helped even more patients than predicted, brought in lots of tax revenue, and had none of the dire consequences opponents were worried about. So, a lot of folks argue expanding it would be good for patients and good for our state. And that's what Issue 3 would do. Many of Issue 3's changes would allow far more Arkansas patients to qualify for medical marijuana and would remove barriers that might keep them out of the program. Opening up certification to all kinds of healthcare practitioners will make it easier to get a license for people who don't have one of the qualifying conditions. Ending the licensing fee and making licenses last 3 years means renewing would be less of a burden for poor Arkansans. For patients who live in rural areas, home grow could save them long drives every time they need more medicine. And expanding the list of qualifying conditions to include anything considered debilitating by your HCP is huge. The Department of Health was supposed to be open to adding more qualifying conditions, but so far only 2 were considered. One is still pending and the other was rejected. So no conditions have been added, and it doesn't look like that will change anytime soon. That means the only way to do it is with an amendment like this one. Folks in favor of Issue 1 argue medical marijuana has helped a lot of people in Arkansas, but the existing restrictions keep it from helping a whole lot more. So expanding the program to as many patients as it can benefit is the right thing to do. But the program hasn't just benefited patients, it's helped the whole state. Medical marijuana has been a huge source of revenue for Arkansas. In 2023, dispensary sales of medical marijuana brought in $31 million in state revenue from the 2 taxes on it. The 4% privilege tax goes to pay for regulation of the marijuana program, and the rest goes to a special fund that's been used to pay for cancer research and to reduce lunch costs for public schools in Arkansas. Meanwhile, the 6.5% sales tax goes to the state general fund, and most of that also goes to public education. So medical marijuana sales provide a lot of funds for well-liked programs. Issue 3 would vastly increase the number of potential Arkansas patients, and more patients means more sales. Issue 3 would also allow patients from other states to buy here, which could bring in business from folks traveling through. And it allows anyone in the U.S. who follows the rules to apply for an Arkansas license. That could bring in big business from Tennessee and Texas, the adjacent states with no medical marijuana program. Shelby County, just across the river, is home to over 900,000 people, almost a third as many as the entire state of Arkansas. So, if Issue 3 passes, sales of medical marijuana will absolutely increase, and in turn, so will the tax revenue. So folks in favor of Issue 3 say it will do our whole state good. But expanding access is only one side of Issue 3. The other is pushing back against the restrictions added since Amendment 98 passed. Some folks argue those changes made the medical marijuana program worse, and Issue 3 would fix that. For example, legislators and the ABCD have restricted dispensaries to only advertising if they can prove that no more than 30% of the people who see their ads are under 18, which is nearly impossible for any public media. So, many dispensaries have just not been advertising. That loses them business and loses our state tax revenue. And in North Arkansas, it's created a weird interaction with Missouri, where marijuana is legal recreationally. Even though transporting marijuana across state lines is illegal, Missouri dispensaries have put up billboards in Jonesboro and Northwest Arkansas to entice Arkansas buyers across state lines. But in those same places, local dispensaries cannot run a billboard for their own legal product. But Issue 3 would require advertising restrictions to be narrowly tailored, meaning there would still be rules to avoid marketing to kids, but those rules would have to achieve that goal in the least restrictive way possible. So dispensaries could finally start advertising. And as a bonus, by making marijuana cards easier to get, Issue 3 might make some folks decide they'd rather buy legally and locally at the Arkansas dispensaries than risk crossing state lines. And here's the final argument for Issue 3. Back in 1951, the Arkansas Supreme Court made it clear that the legislature was not supposed to change any part of the state constitution without going through voters. And yet, our legislature ignored that precedent, using some creative legal interpretations to grant themselves the power to bypass voters. And they used that power to morph the marijuana program into something more restrictive than what the voters had passed. Even though some of those changes were thrown out, there is nothing to stop the state Supreme Court from reversing that decision, or the one from 1951. Issue 3 would remove the bit of the marijuana amendment that legislators interpreted so creatively. But more importantly, it would write into the Constitution that the legislature has to go through voters to change any part of that Constitution. That would protect not only the medical marijuana amendment, but all citizen-initiated amendments, past and future. Supporters say those changes are necessary to prevent future power grabs and protect the power of citizens' initiatives. So, if you believe the current medical marijuana program has done good for our state and its patients and could do even more good if it were expanded, or if you believe some of the restrictions the legislature placed on that program should be rolled back, or if you want a guarantee against the legislature messing with future amendments written into the state constitution, then you'll want to vote yes on issue 3. And that's it. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget, early voting starts October 21st and election day is November 5th. If you like this video, share it with somebody. You can also check out our other ballot issue videos and our content on Arkansas history and politics. And if you want to help us keep making these videos, consider supporting Arkansans on Patreon. With Patreon, you set exactly how much you want to pledge to help the channel each month, as little as $1, and you can change that amount or cancel at any time. A big thanks to our current GoRo level supporters, Tim in Vegas and Caldwell, plus all these other folks that you see on screen. Thanks again, and see you next time for more Arkansans.